Rare was one of my favorite developers back on the N64. And to this day, I think that the N64 was their peak era. After Microsoft bought them, on the original Xbox, we got grabbed by the ghoulies, which, meh. And we also got a remake of Conker's Bad Fur Day, which graphically it looked better, but we're not talking about the original Xbox. I want to talk about the games they made on the 360, which was probably their peak on Xbox. And yeah, let's just get into it. So when the Xbox 360 launched, we got two games, which would be both Perfect Dark and Cameo. And both games initially were being developed for the GameCube, and then they got moved to the Xbox when Microsoft bought them, and then they ended up getting moved to the 360 as launch titles. And, having two games by Rare at launch was kind of, a big deal, because Rare was such a beloved developer back on when they were with Nintendo. And the fact that we were getting two games at launch, one of them being a prequel to Perfect Dark. I almost said sequel. Perfect Dark, is a beloved game. Like, who doesn't want a sequel to Perfect Dark? And probably the people didn't play it, but that's besides the point. But having a new Perfect Dark game, hell yeah. Like, Perfect Dark Zero, it's not as good as the original. Like, when you go back to the 64 with Perfect Dark, GoldenEye was amazing. And Perfect Dark was essentially like the spiritual successor to GoldenEye. It was a sequel, and it was like their version of James Bond, but they didn't have to deal with licensing issues, which is why it took so long to get an HD remaster of GoldenEye. But, going all this time, the original game set the bar so high that when a sequel came out, it probably wasn't going to reach that same level. But this one just didn't come close. It just felt very different. And it had this anime art style. The original Perfect Dark was trying to be more, realistic, as realistic as a 64 game could be. And this one, they kind of took it in a different direction and gave it a more anime-esque look. At least to me, it's anime styled. The game was structured the same way with, you have a level, you have objectives. The harder difficulty you're on, the more objectives you have. But it just didn't feel the same. If you didn't look at it as a Perfect Dark game, it's fine. It's fun. But it's kind of a disappointment, at least to me, because I loved the original so much. And this one was just yeah, cool, it's here. Anyway, when's Halo come out? That's pretty much how it was. This game held us over. I had it upside down. This game essentially held us over until Halo 3 came out. But it didn't do it. So Gears of War held us over until Halo 3 came out. And then you got Cameo. I honestly kind of like this better than Perfect Dark Zero, but a lot of that has to do with, Perfect Dark having that bar from the original. But this was its own thing, and I liked it. It wasn't fantastic, but it was a solid game. You had these creatures you could turn into, and each one had different abilities, and it kind of had puzzles to get through the environment. And, the story was pretty good, and unfortunately it ended in a cliffhanger, and we didn't get a sequel, which is a shame because I think it absolutely deserves a sequel. The sad part is, I didn't really see a lot of people talking about this game, and with Perfect Dark Zero, I know I keep going back to that, but people talked about that, but I mainly kept hearing how disappointed people were in it. This one, people just overlooked, and I don't know if it has to do with, the art style of the game or whatnot. Xbox hasn't exactly been known for stuff like this. I feel that they more are well known for more serious games like Halo and Gears of War and whatnot. And this is just a very different type of game. I really wish they'd make a sequel or remaster this or something, but I just don't think Microsoft gives a shit about it. I mean, I feel like they don't really give a shit about Rare in general. But it's a fun game, but it didn't get the chance it deserved. And I think a sequel could have done so much better. They could have improved on everything from the first one. Because it's not a perfect game. I mean, launch games for consoles tend to be a little iffy at times just because, they try to get it done in time for the console launch. So then I'm kind of going out of order after this, and you'll understand why. But I don't remember if they made this game next or not, but I'm pretty sure they made it after Viva Pinata, which is the next game. But Jetpack Refueled, it was an Xbox Live Arcade game, and it is essentially a remake of, well, I don't even want to say a remake, but more like a sequel to the original Jetpack game, which they made like way back, I think in the 80s. I don't know the exact date, but there was, I believe, a Mac game, and it was just, you're on this tiny screen, go get the ship parts, put it with the ship, and build it, and then go to the next stage. You know, it was just essentially a rinse and repeat thing, and the levels got harder and harder. And this one is the same thing, but they went full blown, like, they went all in. It had like a cartoony art style. It was just fun. And, you know, it was a cheap, it was like, I think like a $10 game when it came out, or like 800 Microsoft points, you know, their currency. Having flashbacks. But it was a fun game. And it's a shame that it never got a physical release, because I collect games, and I would very much like a physical release of that. You know, they added like power-ups to the game that let you have like a spread shot, or like you can shoot up and forward, and it was just very fun. Like it's the type of game that I want to see more like that. It's just fun. And because it wasn't like a full-blown AAA release, you know, they were able to just pretty much put everything they had into it, because it wasn't expensive to make to begin with. And I think that benefited from it. It just was fun. It is included with Rare Replay on Xbox One, but unfortunately it isn't on the disc. Like, none of the Xbox 360 games are on the disc for Rare Replay, which sucks. But yeah, that's probably, I'd say that's probably one of my favorite games that Rare made on the 360. Then we get into the next game, or the next two games, which would be Viva Pinata and Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise. I'll just cover up my face because that makes sense. Viva Pinata, in my opinion, I think is the best game that they did on the 360. It's one of those kind of games that is just a chill game, kind of move at your own pace, and you're just trying to like build your garden and get these pinatas in there. And I don't want to compare it to something like Animal Crossing or The Sims or Harvest Moon, but it's that kind of game, that kind of chill game. You got to try to get these pinatas into your garden, and each one has certain requirements that you have to have. Like, the first pinata is the worm, and in order to get him in the garden, you have to have so much grass. And then once you have so much grass, then you can like actually get him in your garden as like a resident, I think is what they refer to them as. But then the next pinata is a bird, and you have to have like, I think, a tree and a couple of worms in your garden, and then you can get him as a resident. And then it's just kind of this like snowball effect. You have to keep like getting more and more requirements for the next pinata, and they get more and more difficult. But then some of the later ones, you have to like completely change up your garden in order to get them as a resident. Like, I think the hippo requires your garden to be like majority water. So it gets really wild later on. Like, it very much looks like a kid's game, but some of the pinatas later on, they get very like in depth with how you have to get them in your garden. Then you get the sequel, which is Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise. And it's more the same. They just added and changed a few things. Like, it's actually got like 4-player co-op, which is a nice change, you know, playing with somebody over Xbox Live. And, you know, they got like new areas which have like, there's a snow area and a desert area, and they have, you know, hot and cold themed pinatas like penguin and a camel. I kind of feel like the sequel wasn't justified enough, because it just felt like, okay, let's just slap a couple things in there and resell the game. But, you know, it's fun. Honestly, Viva Pinata is probably one of my favorite games on the 360. And I think that was when Rare was able to do whatever they wanted. So then we get into the era of remasters of N64 games. We got, I'm not going to talk about them too long, but you got, you know, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and the original Perfect Dark. They all got like HD remasters, and like with Perfect Dark, you got like updated textures and everything. And then with like Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, they added a few things like Stop and Swap. That feature that they tried to have in the original games was actually implemented, and there was like new collectibles in Banjo-Kazooie, and it would unlock things in Tooie. Nothing amazing, but it was still cool that they did it. And one of the main things with Banjo-Kazooie was the notes. if you would collect a note, then you just had it. In the original game, if you collected however many notes and left the world, when you'd go back in, you'd have to recollect them all. So they more or less changed it to permanently collected, which I liked. And, of course, Perfect Dark had online play and online co-op. Yes, thank you. That's what I wanted from Perfect Dark. Then we get to probably one of the most controversial games that they made. And it's very disappointing. And that would be Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. The first thing, I think most people hate the redesign of the characters because they're so much more blocky looking. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of fits the game being kind of like Minecraft-esque, but with vehicles, which I'll get into. But I think the biggest thing about that game is the fact that it's not Banjo 3E. And I think it was smart for them to not call it Banjo 3E because then people would have been really disappointed. Calling it Nuts and Bolts instead of Banjo 3E does help indicate that it's a spin-off and not a mainline game. But at the same time, it's like it is a sequel because in the game, Grunty talks about how it took her 8 years to hop all the way back to Spiral Mountain. The game as is, if you take Banjo-Kazooie out of the equation altogether, it's actually a pretty fun game. The game is kind of like GTA in terms of like being an open world where you go get missions. And the game itself is themed around your vehicle and, creating vehicles because you'll get all kinds of like parts and weapons and gadgets that you can add to it. And every time you go get a mission, you'll have to, adjust and add things to your vehicle in order to accomplish the mission. And sometimes you might build something to do the mission, but there's actually an easier way to do it. And it very much is about creation, and I do like that. It does kind of give me Minecraft vibes to that extent in terms of like, creating a vehicle. But it's fun for what it is, but it's not a Banjo-Kazooie game. It's just not. That was kind of the end for Rare for a minute, because after that, we didn't really hear what they had going on until the new Xbox experience, or the NXE, I think they called it, where they added avatars. Their answer to the Nintendo Mii. That's what Rare was doing at that point, was making the avatars for Xbox Live. That is such a kick in the nuts for having a developer that made Donkey Kong Country and GoldenEye and Banjo-Kazooie. You're doing these avatars that ultimately most people don't care about. But not all is lost. They did make more games for the Xbox 360. Kinect Sports. I mean, before I even get into the game, I just have to point out, I didn't even notice this until I was about to make this video. You see, on the games, you can tell it's made by Rare. What's missing? They don't even tell you Rare made them on the box, at least on the front of the box. They are on the back, but they didn't even want to tell you straight up front that these were made by Rare. And, I just thought that was kind of funny. I had to point that out. But these were essentially the Xbox 360's answer for Wii Sports. I think Rare did the best they could with the games, considering the fact that Kinect isn't exactly the most functional thing. Like, it can work if it wants to. When it works, it's fun. It can be fun. But I think the problem with those games are, it's not that they're bad. It's the fact that Rare made games that feel like they could have been made by any developer is what's disappointing, because there's not really anything special about them. They don't have that Rare charm. They're just generic sports motion games. Wii Sports had basic sports like golf, bowling, tennis, whatnot. And these ones had, I don't even know what they had. What does it say? It said boxing, soccer, volleyball, bowling, baseball, football, skiing, darts. Oh boy, darts. That's what I want to do when I play video game. Do that. I'd rather just play actual darts at that point. But they are what they are. I can't really talk about them because it's just they're Kinect Wii Sports games. Like it's just so sad to see how Rare went from, like I said, making Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye to making the Kinect games. And that's Rare in a nutshell on the 360. And then when you get to the Xbox One, we got Kinect Sports Rivals, which actually worked better because the Xbox One Kinect was, better. But then we got Rare Replay, a compilation that didn't have, Donkey Kong or GoldenEye on it because licensing issues. Then there was Sea of Thieves, which I didn't play because I don't play online games, but meh, that's Rare. I don't know what else to say. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.